character can be incredibly well written and stunningly acted, but if their design is fundamentally unappealing, audiences simply won't fully connect with them. And though a lot of work goes into workshopping the looks of major characters during pre-production, sometimes the filmmakers only realise it isn't quite working once the film is in the can, and so decide to do better for the next movie. As such, these 10 movie characters, whether heroes or villains, all got slyly subtle makeovers for the sequel, with a relatively minor aspect of their look getting altered in ways that the majority of audience members wouldn't ever notice. To be clear, we're not talking about blatantly noticeable changes like Thanos basically looking like a different person from the Avengers to Avengers Infinity War, but designs that were refined and iterated upon in more low-key yet important ways. From minor clothing changes to revised hairstyles and costume alterations that only the most hardcore of fans would ever notice. These new designs were missed by the vast majority of people watching, so if you did notice them, well done! So with that in mind then, I'm Ellie with What Culture, here with 10 movie character designs changed in subtle ways. Number 10. Freddy Krueger's sleeves got stripes in A Nightmare on Elm Street 2: Freddy's Revenge. The iconic design of A Nightmare on Elm Street's dream-faring antagonist Freddy Krueger seems so firmly classically set in stone that it's difficult to imagine any variations that might have passed all but the most hardcore of fans by. But did you know that Freddy actually rocked an ever so slightly different version of his iconic striped red-green sweater in the original 1984 movie? The sweater in Wes Craven's original didn't have stripes on the sleeves. The stripes were only on the torso portion, while the sleeves were instead pure red. And so it was only in the next year's A Nightmare on Elm Street 2: Freddy's Revenge that the fully striped sweater made its debut, cementing the character's base look forevermore. And yet, no matter how many times you've seen the original A Nightmare on Elm Street, did this ever compute in your mind? Memory is a funny thing. Number 9. Mera's red hair got brighter in AQUAMAN. AQUAMAN's love interest Mera made her first DCEU appearance in the 2017 Whedon cut of Justice League, where in her brief role she rocked a fairly muted head of red hair, tending more towards a fiery orange than anything else. But in AQUAMAN, released the next year, Mera's hair was suddenly an almost cartoonish shade of red, and her costume also a more vibrant green. While the changes haven't ever been officially explained, this is likely due to the differing aesthetic preferences of original Justice League director Zack Snyder and AQUAMAN filmmaker James Wan. AQUAMAN is a far brighter, more colourful film than either version of Justice League, so it makes sense that Wan would want to make Mera pop off the screen. However, the bright red dye job on Amber Heard for AQUAMAN was so strong that the film's colourist, Mark Griffith, actually had to desaturate it for some scenes where it distracted the viewer from other elements in the frame. Confusingly, Mera was back to her old orange do in last year's Snyder cut of Justice League, even in the newly shot Nightmare scene, yet will be back to bright red for her part in AQUAMAN and the Lost Kingdom. Number 8. Buford Tannen lost his giant beard in Back to the Future Part 3. Back to the Future Part 3 is a ludicrously entertaining sequel which unexpectedly shifts the genre to a western and sees Marty and Doc cross paths with Biff Tannen's great-grandfather Buford Mad Dog Tannen. You'll surely remember in the film that Buford had a grubby face, wears a wide-rimmed black hat, and touts a decent tuft of facial hair, namely a handlebar-style moustache and well-grown beard. But Buford actually made a brief cameo in Back to the Future Part 2, when his picture could be seen in the Biff Tannen Museum in the dystopian alternate version of 1985 that Marty travels to. This proto-version of Buford has a much thicker, bushier beard that covers the sides of his face, and his head hair also appears to be much longer and more bouffant. Evidently, Robert Zemeckis and company hadn't yet settled on Buford's final design for Part 3, and so made the subtle-ish alterations with the hope that nobody would care or notice. For the most part, they were right, and after all, what's to say that Buford didn't simply get a haircut? Number 7. Gollum's eye colour and facial shape changed in The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. Gollum makes only a brief appearance in The Lord of the Rings: The Fellowship of the Ring, namely where he's glimpsed by the Fellowship as they travel through the mines of Moria. Even though he's seen only in shadow, fans may notice that when they see Gollum again in The Two Towers, his facial appearance is noticeably different. For starters, his eyes have changed colour from a greyish shade to blue, and in Fellowship what little we saw of his face also appeared more misshapen and monstrous, whereas in The Two Towers and beyond his facial structure has been reworked to look more recognisably humanoid. The reason for this was reportedly to bring Gollum more in line with Andy Serkis, who of course performed extensive performance capture for the character in every appearance from The Two Towers onwards. Due to the low lighting in the Moria scene, it's easy to miss the details of Gollum's face and eyes, but if you pause the shot of him spying on the Fellowship and crank your display's brightness up, it's much easier to make out. Number 6. Godzilla got classic dorsal plates in Godzilla King of the Monsters. Godzilla's appearance admittedly changes all the time, enough that fans basically have trouble keeping track of every slight redesign that occurs for each new movie. While a number of cosmetic alterations were made to Godzilla between the 2014 Gareth Edwards movie and 2019 sequel Godzilla King of the Monsters, the slyest of the lot just might be the creature's iconic dorsal plates. In the 2014 film, the dorsal plates running down Godzilla's back were extremely straight, annoyingly so in the eyes of many fans in fact. And so, for King of the Monsters, the design was changed to give him more uneven and protrusive dorsal plates that didn't seem quite so perfect. This change brought Godzilla closer to the classic depictions of the monster, even if it's absolutely not something that anyone beyond the die-hard Godzilla set would have ever given a second or even first thought. King of the Monsters may have been many things, but at least it succeeded in making Godzilla look more badass in a sneaky way. Number 5. Grindelwald suddenly developed heterochromia in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. While the recent recasting of Gellert Grindelwald from Johnny Depp to Mads Mikkelsen was most certainly not subtle in any way, some prior changes to the character were a little trickier to spot if you're not a hardcore Harry Potter fan. Grindelwald made his first on-screen appearance back in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, where Jamie Campbell Bower portrayed a young version of the character and Michael Byrne the older equivalent. Though both Bower and Byrne played a blue-eyed Grindelwald, in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, Depp's middle-aged version of the character was not only totally different in general appearance, but his eyes had changed. Now, Grindelwald had heterochromia, with his right eye coloured grey and his left darker, and to compound the change, Bower even made a brief appearance in the film as a teenage Grindelwald where he too had the same altered eyes. This isn't strictly a plot hole, because this being Harry Potter, the change can be explained away via magic hooey, even if it's admittedly odd that the older Grindelwald, seen in Deathly Hallows Part 1, would revert to having blue eyes. It's probably also telling that Fantastic Beasts' original script did indeed refer to Grindelwald's eyes as being blue. Quite how the change came about or why then is anyone's guess. Number 4. Darth Vader's helmet got a sneaky redesign in Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. Between filming of Star Wars A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, revisions were made to Darth Vader's iconic uniform, especially his helmet. These changes were both for aesthetic and comfort reasons. After Vader actor David Prowse complained that the helmet didn't fit his head too well while shooting A New Hope. But cosmetically speaking, the subtle changes for Empire included the helmet getting a larger chin vent, changing the look of the mouth grille, and giving the eyes an amber-coloured tint rather than black. These alterations are scarcely noticeable unless you're watching the movies back to back, and even then, not really. Presumably, with Empire having almost triple the budget of A New Hope, the filmmakers felt that they could do a little better with Vader's design, hence these small changes, which of course carried through to Return of the Jedi also. Number 3. Tony Rydinger had a handsome facelift in Incredibles 2. You probably remember that Violet Parr's love interest in the first Incredibles is Tony Rydinger, a pretty typical-looking teenage boy whose physical features couldn't be more resoundingly average. But in Incredibles 2, Tony gets an unexpected makeover that transcends the mere awkward physical changes encountered by any teenager. Tony's sunken-in eyes are now wide and peppy, his mouth has less of a gaping quality to it, his eyebrows are longer, and his hair looks more appealingly swept to the side. There's blossoming as you go through puberty, and then there's basically looking like a completely different person. If you saw Incredibles 2 without rewatching the original, you likely didn't ever think about this, but side by side, the changes are pretty wild. Fans who did notice were wildly divided on the redesign, some feeling it strayed too far from the physical essence of the original Tony, while others praised it for making him look more, well, cute. Number 2. Thor ditched the dyed eyebrows in the Avengers. Thor Odin's son has changed up his look many times over the course of his MCU tenure, though most of these designs have drawn total attention to themselves. For example, his short-haired look in Thor Ragnarok and Bro Thor in Avengers Endgame. But if you haven't seen Kenneth Branagh's original Thor in quite some time, and honestly that's probably most of us, it's easy to forget just how different the Crown Prince of Asgard actually looked. The defining difference? His eyebrows. For reasons that will forever remain totally baffling, Thor's eyebrows are dyed blonde, ensuring they near perfectly match the colour of his hair in an unsettlingly unnatural way. While you can argue that this design choice is successful in helping Thor seem like an other compared to the film's human cast, it also looks rather silly, and so from the Avengers onwards, Hemsworth got to flout his natural darker brows. Hilariously, even Marvel Studios boss Kevin Feige admitted he regretted making Hemsworth dye his eyebrows in the first film. He said, "Definitively, the one thing I would definitely do differently if I had to do it over again is we would not have dyed Chris Hemsworth's eyebrows blonde in the first Thor. Because we were like, Thor is blonde, he has to be blonde. And Hemsworth was great and awesome and pulled it off. But there are a couple of shots I watched and I'm like, oh my god, that poor guy. We made him freaking dye his eyebrows. That's ridiculous. And I can laugh about it now because Hemsworth is Thor and he doesn't need long hair or a cape or a hammer or 2 eyeballs to be Thor." The change was subtle enough that many fans didn't notice, or at least couldn't pinpoint precisely why Thor looked different in the Avengers. Number 1. The Terror Dogs were given anatomically correct bodies in Ghostbusters Afterlife. Ghostbusters Afterlife sees the new heroes facing off against a legacy villain, Gozer the Gazarian, and her Terror Dogs, demonic horned hellhounds with glowing eyes. Though the design wasn't changed too much, beyond Afterlife employing a mix of practical and digital effects, alterations were made to its anatomy to make it more believably mobile. Basically, the original Terror Dog design made no sense from a physical perspective. It was so backloaded with mass that it wouldn't be able to run, and so the redesign saw some of that mass shifted to the midsection, complete with more muscular arms. Concept artist Bryn Metheny explained, "The Terror Dog in the original Ghostbusters was built at a time where it wasn't going to be animated doing high velocity running through a street. The front arms are so long that it doesn't really have a great range of motion when you're wanting it to move around like a dog. My initial concept was to keep the same silhouette, with this huge barrel chest, long thick neck, big forearms and skinnier back end, but bring in an element of functional anatomy that made it able to run around and have this heavy, scary gait." And yet the overwhelming majority of fans would have never noticed any differences at all. And that concludes our list. If you think we missed any, then do let us know in the comments below, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe and tap that notification bell so you never miss a What Culture video again. Also head over to Twitter and follow us there, and I can be found across various social medias just by searching Ellie Littlechild. I've been Ellie with What Culture. I hope you have a magical day, and I'll see you real soon.